What I'm about to reveal may permanently change the way you think about food, and it may be the hidden reason your strength is fading faster than it should. I need to tell you something that most doctors are not talking about. There are 3 foods that the average older adult has in their kitchen right now. Foods that look completely innocent. Foods that your doctor has probably never warned you about. And those 3 foods may be silently stealing something that no medication can easily replace. Your ability to walk freely. I'm Dr. William Lee, and in the next several minutes, I'm going to show you exactly which 3 everyday foods may be quietly weakening the legs that carry you through your life. And then I'm going to show you the 3 foods that can help you fight back. Now, I know you've heard a lot of health advice over the years, and much of it has been good. But here is the part that isn't always said. After the age of 65, your body reacts to certain foods in a way that is completely different from how it did when you were younger. And some foods that seem perfectly fine can start doing real damage. Silently, slowly, with no obvious warning signs, until one day your balance is off, your legs feel heavy, and your steps feel less certain than they used to. That matters enormously because falling is the leading cause of fatal injuries in adults over 65, not heart attacks, not cancer, falls. And many of those falls begin long before anyone sees them coming. So stay with me through this entire video because one of the foods I'm going to name later looks so healthy that almost everyone over 65 is eating it regularly, and you need to know the truth about it. Let me start by explaining what is actually happening inside the aging body because understanding the biology is what makes everything else I'm going to tell you make complete sense. After the age of 60, a biological process called sarcopenia accelerates dramatically. Sarcopenia is the progressive, age-related loss of muscle mass, muscle strength, and muscle function. It is not simply getting out of shape. It is a physiological shift driven by changes in hormonal signaling, protein metabolism, inflammatory pathways, and mitochondrial function that begin in your 30s but accelerate sharply after 60 and even more steeply after 70. Research published in the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia, and Muscle found that adults over 60 who are not actively counteracting this process lose between 1 and 2% of their muscle mass every single year. That sounds modest until you calculate what it means over a decade. A person who does nothing to counter sarcopenia between ages 65 and 75 may lose 10 to 20% of their total muscle mass. And the muscles that go first, the ones that sarcopenia targets most aggressively in the early stages, are the slow twitch stabilizing muscles of the lower body, the quadriceps, the hip abductors, the calf muscles, the deep postural muscles of the core, precisely the muscles that keep you upright, keep your balance, and keep you moving safely through the world. And here is the critical piece that most people don't hear. Certain foods accelerate sarcopenia, not by some exotic mechanism, by interfering directly with the processes your muscles depend on to maintain themselves. Protein synthesis, mitochondrial energy production, hormone receptor sensitivity, inflammatory regulation. Each of the 3 foods I'm going to describe does damage through one or more of these pathways, and each of the 3 protective foods works by directly supporting one or more of them. Let's begin with the 3 foods you need to stop eating or dramatically reduce if you are over 60 and you care about your leg strength, your balance, and your independence. The first food is one that I know is going to create some resistance because it has an undeserved health halo that has persisted for decades. I am talking about whole wheat bread and other products made from whole grain flour, and I want to be precise here because I am not talking about whole intact grains like oats, brown rice, or quinoa. I am specifically talking about flour-based products, even those labeled whole wheat or multigrain. Here is the problem. When any grain, including whole wheat, is milled into flour, the physical structure of the grain is completely destroyed. The fiber, which in an intact grain forms a physical barrier that slows starch digestion, is now finely ground into particles that offer almost no protective effect. The glycemic index of whole wheat bread is approximately 71. White bread is 75. The difference is negligible. Both cause a rapid and significant spike in blood glucose and insulin. Why does this matter specifically for muscle in adults over 60? Because the insulin response to these repeated glucose spikes, when it occurs chronically day after day over years, drives a process called insulin resistance. And insulin resistance in skeletal muscle is one of the most direct biochemical causes of impaired muscle protein synthesis. When muscle cells become resistant to insulin signaling, they become less responsive to the anabolic signal that insulin normally provides, which is the signal that tells the muscle cell to take up amino acids from the bloodstream and use them to build and repair muscle protein. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition followed adults between the ages of 60 and 75 and found that those with higher markers of insulin resistance showed significantly accelerated rates of muscle protein breakdown and significantly lower rates of muscle protein synthesis compared to insulin-sensitive individuals of the same age, even when protein intake was equivalent. The muscles were receiving the same raw materials, but the cellular machinery to use those materials was impaired by insulin resistance. And there is a second mechanism. The glucose spikes caused by these flour-based products promote a process I discussed in a previous video called glycation, the bonding of glucose to proteins, including the structural proteins of muscle fiber. Glycated muscle proteins are stiffer, less functional, and more prone to inflammatory damage. The accumulation of advanced glycation end products, AGEs, in muscle tissue has been directly associated in research with reduced muscle contractile force and increased muscle fatigability in older adults. My recommendation is not to eliminate all carbohydrates. Far from it. It is to replace flour-based products with intact whole grains and lower glycemic carbohydrate sources that provide sustained energy without the glucose spike that damages muscle function over time. Sweet potatoes, lentils, oats in their whole rolled or steel-cut form. Quinoa. These provide carbohydrate energy with a glycemic impact that is dramatically lower and with a fiber and micronutrient profile that supports rather than undermines muscle health. The second food is one that has become almost universal in Western kitchens and that I believe is one of the most underappreciated contributors to the inflammatory muscle damage that drives fall risk in older adults. I am talking about refined vegetable oils. Specifically, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, canola oil, and cottonseed oil. These are the oils in almost every processed food, every restaurant fryer, and most home kitchens. And the problem is not fat. Fat is essential, and many fats are profoundly protective. The problem is the specific fatty acid composition of these oils and what happens to them in the body. These oils are extraordinarily high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, primarily linoleic acid. In modest amounts, linoleic acid is a necessary nutrient. But the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids in the diet has a direct and powerful effect on the body's baseline inflammatory state. The optimal ratio for health, based on evolutionary and clinical evidence, is approximately 4:1, meaning 4 omega-6 fatty acids for every 1 omega-3. The average American adult consuming a standard Western diet has a ratio of approximately 20:1. Some studies suggest it is even higher. This profound imbalance creates a biochemical environment in which the metabolic derivatives of omega-6 fatty acids, particularly arachidonic acid and its downstream products, dominate the inflammatory signaling landscape of the body. In the context of skeletal muscle, chronic low-grade inflammation driven by this omega-6 excess activates a family of signaling molecules called inflammatory cytokines, particularly TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, that directly inhibit muscle protein synthesis, promote muscle protein breakdown through the ubiquitin proteasome pathway, and impair the function of satellite cells, which are the muscle stem cells responsible for muscle repair and regeneration. A landmark study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that elevated markers of systemic inflammation, specifically C-reactive protein and IL-6, were the strongest independent predictors of accelerated muscle loss in adults over 65, more predictive than age itself, more predictive than physical activity level, and more predictive than protein intake. The inflammation was eating the muscle. And here is what makes this particularly insidious in the context of cooking. These oils, when heated to frying or roasting temperatures, oxidize and form toxic aldehydes, compounds like 4-hydroxynonenal and acrolein that have been shown to penetrate muscle tissue and directly damage mitochondrial membranes, reducing the energy-producing capacity of muscle cells and making them more vulnerable to fatigue and injury. Research from De Montfort University found that reheated vegetable oils produced aldehyde levels 100 to 200 times higher than World Health Organization safety guidelines. And I described this in detail in my video on reheated foods, which I encourage you to watch if you haven't. The replacement is straightforward: extra virgin olive oil for cold use and low to medium heat cooking, avocado oil for higher heat cooking. Both have monounsaturated fat profiles that do not produce the omega-6 inflammatory imbalance, and both contain polyphenols with documented anti-inflammatory properties that actively support rather than undermine muscle health. The third food, and this is the one I warned you about at the beginning, the one that looks so healthy that almost everyone over 65 is eating it regularly without any suspicion, is a specific category of vegetables that I need to explain carefully because the recommendation is nuanced and it is very easy to misunderstand. I am talking about high oxalate vegetables consumed in excess and without the nutritional cofactors that neutralize their effects. Specifically, spinach, Swiss chard, and beet greens when consumed in large quantities, particularly raw, or as the dominant vegetable in the diet of an older adult. I want to be precise here because I am absolutely not telling you to avoid all vegetables. Vegetables are among the most powerful health protective foods that exist. But there is a specific issue with the highest oxalate greens in the context of older adults that is genuinely underappreciated. Oxalates are naturally occurring compounds in certain plants that bind to minerals, particularly calcium and magnesium, in the digestive tract and form insoluble complexes that cannot be absorbed. In a young person with optimal digestive function, this is a manageable issue. But after the age of 60, with declining stomach acid production, reduced intestinal absorption efficiency, and the already elevated need for both calcium and magnesium, consuming large amounts of high oxalate vegetables can meaningfully impair the absorption of minerals that are critical for muscle function. Calcium and magnesium are not only important for bones, they are the primary electrolytes involved in muscle contraction and relaxation. Calcium triggers the contractile mechanism in muscle fiber. Magnesium is responsible for the relaxation phase and for the ATP energy release that powers the contraction in the first place. Magnesium deficiency, which a significant percentage of older adults already have due to declining dietary intake and reduced absorption, produces exactly the symptoms that I described at the beginning of this video: muscle weakness, muscle cramps, impaired balance, increased fall risk. A study published in the European Journal of Epidemiology followed over 3,000 adults between 65 and 80 and found that those with the lowest serum magnesium levels had a 53% higher rate of fall-related injuries and a 40% reduction in grip strength compared to those with adequate magnesium status. And the specific concern with raw spinach and Swiss chard is this: 1 cup of raw spinach contains approximately 656 milligrams of oxalate, and oxalate binds calcium at a ratio of approximately 1:1 by molecular weight. If you are making daily green smoothies or large raw spinach salads and you are not adequately supplementing calcium and magnesium, you may be systematically undermining your own mineral status in a way that accelerates muscle weakness and instability. The solution is not to eliminate spinach, it is to eat it cooked rather than raw, because cooking reduces oxalate content by 30 to 90% depending on the method, with boiling and discarding the water being the most effective. And to diversify your leafy greens, rotating spinach with lower oxalate options like kale, bok choy, romaine lettuce, and arugula. Now let's talk about the 3 foods that I want you to eat more of if you are over 60 and you want to protect your leg strength, your balance, and your independence. These are the foods with the most direct and well-documented evidence for counteracting the specific biological processes that drive muscle loss and fall risk in older adults. The first protective food is eggs. And I know that eggs have had a complicated reputation over the years due to concerns about dietary cholesterol that the research has since largely revised. But from the perspective of muscle health in older adults, eggs are one of the most important foods you can consume, and here is why in precise biological terms. Eggs contain the highest biological value protein of any whole food, meaning the proportion of the amino acids in egg protein that can be directly utilized for muscle protein synthesis is higher than chicken, higher than beef, higher than fish, and dramatically higher than any plant protein source. This is not a minor difference. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition compared the muscle protein synthetic response to egg protein versus wheat protein at equivalent nitrogen intakes and found that egg protein produced a 45% greater anabolic response in skeletal muscle. For an older adult whose muscle protein synthesis rate is already declining due to the age-related process of anabolic resistance, this difference in protein quality is clinically meaningful. But beyond protein quality, eggs contain several specific nutrients that directly support the biology of muscle preservation in older adults. Leucine, the branched-chain amino acid that acts as the primary trigger for the mTOR signaling pathway that activates muscle protein synthesis, is present in eggs in concentrations among the highest of any food. Vitamin D3, which is present in meaningful amounts in egg yolks, is a critical cofactor for muscle function that operates through nuclear receptors in muscle cells to regulate gene expression related to muscle contraction and regeneration. Vitamin D deficiency, which affects an estimated 40 to 60% of adults over 65, is one of the most strongly documented nutritional risk factors for sarcopenia and fall-related injury. And choline, which is abundant in egg yolks and which most older adults are deficient in, is a precursor to acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction that transmits the signal from the nerve to the muscle fiber. Adequate choline status is essential for the efficiency of that neuromuscular communication, and its deficiency contributes to the impaired neuromuscular coordination that increases fall risk. 2 to 3 whole eggs per day, including the yolk, provides a combination of leucine, vitamin D, choline, and complete protein that no other single food matches for older adult muscle health. The second protective food is sardines, and I choose sardines specifically over other fish for several reasons that I will explain. Sardines are one of the few foods that simultaneously provide provide three nutrients that are each independently critical for older adult muscle and bone health in a single, inexpensive, and widely available package. They provide omega-3 fatty acids in the EPA and DHA forms that are directly bioavailable to cell membranes, unlike the ALA form found in plant sources that must be converted at very low efficiency. They provide vitamin D3 in clinically meaningful amounts, typically 270 to 300 IU per serving, and they provide calcium when eaten with their soft, edible bones, with a single serving providing approximately 350 milligrams of highly bioavailable calcium. No supplement product matches this natural combination, but the omega-3 content is what I want to focus on specifically here. EPA and DHA from fatty fish have multiple direct effects on skeletal muscle that are profoundly relevant for older adults. First, they reduce the inflammatory cytokines, TNF-alpha and IL-6, that I described as primary drivers of muscle protein breakdown in adults over 65. A randomized controlled trial published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that omega-3 supplementation, equivalent to the amount in 3 weekly servings of fatty fish, produced a significant increase in the rate of muscle protein synthesis in adults over 65, independent of any change in protein intake or physical activity. The omega-3s were making the muscles more anabolically responsive, more capable of using protein to build and repair. Second, DHA specifically is a critical structural component of the mitochondrial membrane in muscle cells. Higher DHA incorporation into muscle cell membranes has been associated with greater mitochondrial efficiency, meaning muscle cells produce more energy per unit of substrate, translating to better endurance, less fatigue, and more reliable muscle performance during the balanced demands of everyday movement. Eating sardines 2 to 3 times per week provides the omega-3 dose that clinical research has shown to produce meaningful improvements in muscle protein synthesis and inflammatory markers in older adults. The third protective food is one that I consider to be among the most powerful and the most underutilized therapeutic foods available to adults over 60. I am talking about beets, and specifically the nitrate content of beets and what it does for the circulatory system that supplies your muscles. Beets are extraordinarily high in dietary nitrates. When you consume dietary nitrates, bacteria in your mouth and enzymes in your body convert them into nitric oxide through a pathway called the nitrate-nitrite-nitric oxide pathway. Nitric oxide is one of the most important signaling molecules in the cardiovascular system. It causes smooth muscle relaxation in blood vessel walls, producing vasodilation, and vasodilation means increased blood flow, meaning more oxygen and more nutrients delivered to the muscles that depend on that supply to function. In older adults, the endothelial cells that line blood vessels progressively lose their capacity to produce nitric oxide through the conventional enzymatic pathway involving eNOS endothelial nitric oxide synthase. This age-related decline in nitric oxide bioavailability is one of the primary reasons why muscle endurance, exercise tolerance, and functional capacity decline with age, even in people who maintain physical activity. The muscles simply receive less of what they need to perform because the circulatory supply becomes less efficient. Dietary nitrates from beets bypass this age-related enzymatic decline and restore nitric oxide availability through a completely different pathway. A remarkable study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology gave older adults either concentrated beet juice providing approximately 400 milligrams of dietary nitrate or a placebo for 2 weeks and then measured their muscle power output during standardized exercise testing. The beet juice group showed a 13% improvement in maximal power output in the legs and a significant improvement in exercise efficiency, meaning they consumed less oxygen to perform the same workload. Another study published in Hypertension found that a single dose of beet juice produced significant reductions in systolic blood pressure in older adults, reductions comparable to those seen with low-dose antihypertensive medication, and blood pressure control is itself directly relevant to fall risk because hypertensive episodes and the use of antihypertensive drugs are among the leading pharmacological contributors to orthostatic hypotension and dizziness in older adults. The practical application is straightforward. Half a cup of cooked beets 3 to 4 times per week, or a small glass of 100% beet juice without added sugar 3 to 4 times weekly provides the nitrate dose that the research has validated for cardiovascular and muscle performance benefits. If you take blood pressure medication, discuss adding beets to your diet with your physician because the combined effect may require a medication adjustment. That is not a warning to avoid them. It is evidence that they work. Now, I want to close with something that I think is more important than any individual food on this list. It is the concept of what I call the functional threshold. There is a level of muscle strength and neuromuscular coordination below which everyday activities, standing from a chair, stepping over a threshold, recovering from a slight stumble, become genuinely dangerous. Above that threshold, these activities are managed automatically and unconsciously. Below it, Every one of them becomes a potential fall event, and the difference between being above and below that threshold, for many older adults, is not a massive exercise program or a complete dietary overhaul. It is a collection of consistent, specific, achievable daily habits. Replacing refined vegetable oils with olive oil and avocado oil. Reducing flour-based products and replacing them with intact whole grains and legumes. Cooking your spinach instead of eating it raw. Adding 2 to 3 eggs to your daily diet. Eating sardines 2 to 3 times per week, including beets regularly as a source of dietary nitrate. These are not dramatic interventions. They do not require a gym membership or an expensive supplement protocol. They require the decision to take the biology of aging seriously and to use food as the first-line tool for counteracting it, the way I believe the evidence compels us to. I have spent my career studying how the body defends itself against disease, degeneration, and decline. And what I have come to believe with great conviction, based on decades of research, is that the human body at 65, at 70, at 80, retains a remarkable capacity to respond to the right inputs. The muscles can be strengthened, the inflammatory burden can be reduced, the mitochondria can be supported, the circulatory system can be improved. The biological processes of aging can be slowed, not stopped, but slowed meaningfully, in ways that translate directly into years of greater independence, greater mobility, and greater quality of life. The legs that carry you through your days are not simply weakening because of age. They are weakening because of a combination of biological processes that specific foods either accelerate or resist. You now know which foods do which. That knowledge belongs to you, and it is actionable starting with your very next meal. I'm Dr. William Lee. If this video gave you something useful, please share it with someone over 60 in your life who you care about. Subscribe to this channel. If you want to continue receiving evidence-based medical information, you can apply immediately. And leave me a comment below. I want to know, which of these 6 foods surprised you the most, and which one are you going to change first? Your body is still listening to what you feed it. Make sure what you're saying is worth hearing.